Not knowing your legal obligations as a landlord is a risk you simply can't afford to take. It's one mistake that can land you in serious legal trouble. Landlords are responsible for providing a safe, habitable property, complying with local, state, and federal laws, provincial if you're here in Canada, and understanding tenant rights. Ignorance of the law won't protect you from fines or lawsuits. But here's the thing. If you miss even one critical legal requirement, it could cost you your property, your reputation, and a lot of money. Let's talk about the essential legal obligations every landlord must know to stay compliant and protect their investment. Now, let me share with you a heartbreaking situation, and I'm going to speak in this case about rent control because that is a legal requirement. So this is years ago, but it always sticks with my memory. So there was basically somebody came to see me and his dad had just passed away. Okay, they had, I think it was a 40 or 50 unit apartment block. Now the problem was that there were some illegal rent increases. Now, before you start going, oh, well, did they deserve this? So his dad had renovated almost every single apartment with his bare hands, okay? The tenants basically had agreed to pay more rent because of this. I mean, the conversation probably went something like, hey, you know what? The property is 30 years since, I think they owned it for a long time, like 20, 30 years. This was like a legacy family property meant to pass wealth down to the kids. So the conversation probably went something like, hey, you know what? It's been forever since we've upgraded anything. If I give you a new kitchen, some flooring, and I paint the place, will you pay $400 or $500 more in rent? And everybody did, okay? Here in Manitoba, there is a very set regulation and a process by which you can increase the rent. It's not easy, but you can do legal rent increases even with renovations. But this father didn't do that, okay? When I took over the file, when I looked at the file, the regulations here, at least in Manitoba, means that if there are any illegal rent increases, the current owner has to pay it back for as long as those records go. So when you think about a 50 unit apartment block, it doesn't take very long, 50 units, even if you raise it by, let's say $200, 50 times 200 is $10,000 by my math, $10,000 a month, okay? Times 12 months, that's 10,000, 120K times 2 years, that's $240,000 already. I don't even know how, and they can go back basically decades if they have records that long. A new owner still can't say there's no excuse. If you're buying a property, at least here in Manitoba, and you don't do your due diligence, and there were illegal rent increases, you are held responsible for 2 years of those rental increases. So what happens there is if the rent was $800 back then and you increased it to $1,000, the tenants are paying $200 extra. In this example, you would have to pay back 1, 2, 3 years of rent, $200 times, again, it's the economies of scale that really kills you here. You have to pay back the tenants every penny. Not only that, but now you're going to have to roll back the rent to the original whatever it was. So let's say that your pro forma, let's say you were buying a property and you assume that the rent was $1,500 and it gets rolled back because of an illegal rent increase that you didn't pick up in your due diligence period, or your lawyer didn't, and it gets rolled back to, I don't know, $1,000. Not only do you have to pay back that $500 times however many units, times however many tenants, but now your rent gets rolled back to $1,000. So now you can't even cash flow. And the property, because as you know, these income properties are appraised and valued with the cap rates. Okay, now your cap rate is terrible, and your asset's probably worth millions of dollars less than what you paid for it. Okay, in this case, $250,000 was owed by my potential client. He was forced to sell the family asset. They just couldn't recover, and that asset, unfortunately, could never give them the long-term wealth that his father wanted him to. So let's speak about your basic obligations as a landlord. Number 1, providing habitable, can you say that? Providing habitable living conditions. Okay, say that 5 times. Okay, you want to understand local, provincial, state, federal landlord tenant laws, and you want to understand things like security deposits and evictions. Okay, so let's back up for a second here. What are the basic obligations in providing good living conditions? I'm not going to say habitable again. Good living conditions. Well, who's going to judge for that? Here in Manitoba, up here in Canada, we have your local building codes, and you also have the residential tenancies, okay? And you also have bylaw enforcement, okay? Or what they call the Neighborhood Livability Act. That's what they call it here. Either way, if you're not providing good living conditions up to code, whatever level of government can come in, give you a warning, give you a citation for fines, and then in most cases, fix it themselves and then bill you for the rest, to invoice you at a significantly higher rate plus administration fees. Or in the case of the province here with the residential tenancies branch, they would issue you the order, and then if you don't comply, they would fix it. But then in order to get the payment for that, they're not invoicing you. They're giving an order to your tenant and confiscating the rent until that invoice is paid. So, I mean, either way, you don't want to be on the offside of that, okay? So you want to understand all of the local, federal laws, state laws, provincial laws. I mentioned security deposits and evictions. Same type of thing. You want to handle your security deposits in compliance with those laws. So if your law says, at least here in Manitoba, security deposit can only be 1/2 month rent, don't take more than 1/2 month. If you came from Ontario, or I think Alberta allows first and last months, I can't remember now, you have to realize what province you're in. I can tell you, when my past experience, when I've taken over files from clients that have taken first and last month's rent, or even a full month rent in security deposit, and then we go to court against the non-payment of rent, what's going to happen there? The first thing they do is they ask the tenant, how much have you had in your security deposit? What did you give the landlord? And they're going to say whatever they're going to say, right? It's $1,000 when it should be $500. The first thing that hearing officer is going to do is order the landlord to pay back the $500 that's been illegally taken, even though the tenant might owe $10,000 in back rent. It might not seem fair, but that's the first thing you're going to do. So make sure you know your security deposit laws, tenant deposits, what you're allowed to take. It's different in every state and province. Legal proceedings. Do you know how to evict somebody and avoid illegal eviction? What's an illegal eviction? Well, evicting somebody, changing the locks, throwing their stuff out onto the front lawn. Facebook, it might seem like good advice, emotional advice, but all it's going to do is land you in hot water, get you fines. It's going to ruin your reputation as a professional landlord, okay? Fair housing, that is another thing, okay? So fair housing, you want to make sure that you are complying with whatever landlord needs to know about not discriminating in renting, okay? So there's fair housing in the US, and up here in Canada, we have the Human Rights Act, okay? What does that mean exactly? Speaking from my own experience with human rights, and what I will say is the laws differ in every jurisdiction, okay? Up here in Canada, we are not allowed to discriminate on income source. So that means somebody on employment and income assistance, some people call it welfare, some people call it social assistance. Regardless, the government is paying, okay? There's a stigma associated with that. A lot of landlords do not want to have that, right? I believe that's called Section 8 housing in the States. Up here in Canada, we cannot discriminate on income source. So if somebody is working or somebody is on EIA, employment and income assistance, we can't deny the person on EIA simply because they're on EIA, because that is discriminating on income source. You can't discriminate on visible race, minority characteristics, age. So you can't, for example, not rent to somebody because they're younger, right? Oh, well, you're only 19 years old. What you can do, however, as I've mentioned in some previous podcast episodes, is you can not approve them because they don't have rental experience, okay? However, if they come with a co-signer, then you pretty well have to accept them. Now, hopefully, if you don't want somebody, and I'll give you an example. Up here in Canada, if somebody is a convicted felon, or let's say they're, convicted in first-degree murder and they just got out, we are not allowed to deny them because they're a convicted felon. I know there's states, some places in the United States where you're allowed to do that. We can't do that up here in Canada. Literally, if they're a murderer, you have to accept them. If you don't, and they fight you at the Human Rights Commission, you've got now a big mess on your hands with a bunch of lawyers over there working pro bono for the tenants' rights, and it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and possible settlements, okay? So you want to make sure that you know everything. I've only touched on just a few things here, but what I would say is it's really important staying legally compliant, protect yourself and your property, and ultimately your legacy and your family. You can imagine, right? You could get sued for something, and because you didn't protect yourself with even property insurance, now you lose everything, millions of dollars even, and your entire career, life, not to mention just the property, okay? So what I would recommend, because I'm not a lawyer, I should preface every episode when I'm doing this type of podcast with advice, I'm not a lawyer, but seek legal advice when you're unsure of any obligations, okay? So if you want a comprehensive guide to staying compliant with landlord laws, get us to give you, and you can download our Essential Legal Compliance Guide for Landlords. It's packed with tips to help you avoid all of these costly legal mistakes. So hit us up for that. We'd be happy to send it out. And thanks for watching this episode of Landlord Pal.